So welcome back. Monday. There's only 6 days of class left, of actual class days. 3 weeks, right? Which means that there's not a lot of time. Which means that we need to be finishing our final projects and spending our time doing renderings, right? So there are some things that I think are really important that I want to impart on you before you move on. And we're going to spend the next 4 class days really working on this. And then the last week, I'll show you some Photoshop collaging techniques and give you basically full reign of the days to get ready for the final. But I think one of the things that that happens in a class like this is we spend so much time talking about V-Ray renderings and doing photorealistic renderings and all that stuff that we forget that there are really valuable drawings that we need to create out of a Rhino file, and it doesn't do you a lot of good if, for example, you model your whole building for 220 in Rhino and then don't get a floor plan and a section and some nice looking drawings out of it. And so I want to make sure that you guys really understand the process for creating those drawings out of a Rhino file. If you do all the work to model it, it should be really easy to cut those sections and to do it. So we're going to start today with cutting sections and learning kind of how sections work in Rhino. There are some tricks to it. It will, in all likelihood, take us 2 days to get through sections. That's okay. That's to be expected. But we're going to kind of talk about the various types of sections, and then I'll show you how to do sectional renderings. Next class, we'll not do sections. So even though today's day 1 of sections, we're actually going to split it. Next class, we'll deal with kind of basic drawings and how do you get the drawings out. Then the next day, we'll go back to sections and do a sectional drawing in addition to your sectional rendering. So today is sectional rendering day, if that makes sense. And so we'll kind of walk through it. I have a bunch of steps that I use to create the sections. What I've done is I've opened a version of this file. It doesn't have all the lights in it. It has some of the lights in it. But it's also it's set up for daytime rendering because I want to do this first example as a daytime rendering so we can see the sun and kind of how all of that plays in. So as I look at this building and I think about cutting a section, the section that I want to cut is going to end up going through the stairs. So if I show this in ghosted mode for a little bit, actually let's go into X-ray mode and you might be able to see a little bit more. I want the section to cut through one of the flights of stairs, and I want to be looking at the building so that I can see these 2 rooms. I have the option of cutting the section in either direction, so I can be looking out the windows or I can not be looking in the windows. I'm going to do it looking back toward the hillside for right now. You obviously have to think about what's the right section for you, and you'll make that decision based on your particular building and model. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to create a really, really large plane. And if we zoom out a little bit, you can see that I have my terrain and I have my water, and it's a really big file. What I want is a very large vertical plane. And let me create, before I get too far into this, I'm going to create a layer that's called section. And I'll make that active. And then I'll end up with some sublayers as we go forward. What I'll start with is a really big section plane. So I want a vertical plane, and I want it to cut through everything in my model, right? So I can cut all the way through everything. I'll make it big. So it's this giant plane. I'm going to move it vertically down so that it for sure cuts through absolutely everything in my scene. Okay? Now I need to view this in the top view and adjust where this giant section plane, so there's the section plane, I need to make sure that it cuts through my building where I want it to cut. So I'm going to go to move, and I'm going to turn off all of my snaps for right now because I really don't want to snap to anything. I just want to arbitrarily move this. So I'm going to move this so that it's cutting through the upper set of stairs but viewing the lower set of stairs, if that makes sense. Okay? So I've elected to cut that as my section, right? That's where I'm ultimately going to cut. And if we look at it in this kind of perspective view, right, and especially if I switch it back to, let's go to a shaded mode here, we can see that it kind of, this plane tells us where the section is going to occur. Does that make sense so far? Yeah? Okay, so now I have some options. The first thing that I can do is I can create a very basic section using a command called section. It's not going to be all that exciting, but I at least want to show you what it does. So let me create a sublayer, and I'll call this basic section. I'll make that active, and I'm going to type section. Right? It's going to say select object for section. I'll say all. Right? I'm not going to include that big section plane. Right? I'll go ahead and hit enter. And it's going to say start of section. This is where I'll use my plane. Right? Let me turn back on my snaps. Start of section, end of section. Right? And it will create, essentially, a line drawing that cuts through. Let me zoom. Selected. Right? That shows where everything intersects in this section. So we can kind of see it. Okay. Reasonable. But it gives me no real information other than a basic line drawing of what I've cut through. So to me, that's not the most valuable tool. So we're going to use something else instead. And what we're going to use instead, let me go ahead and turn this basic section off, is a plugin for Rhino that's called Section Tools. And this Section Tools plugin, if you have Rhino at home, you can download it and load it. It's free from the Food for Rhino website. It's built by the people who run Rhino or who make Rhino. It's really a great, fantastic tool for doing these kinds of sections. I use it all the time. It has already been installed on these computers, so we don't have to do anything particularly fancy to create this because it's already been installed. So there should be a menu item at the top here that says Section Tools. Everything that you can do with these section tools is available from that menu. There are also key commands for doing the same stuff. So I'm going to start by creating a section. So I'm going to click on Section Tools and type Create. The command is stcreate, if you want. And it's going to say select objects to create a section of. And so I'm going to type all, but I'm going to deselect this big section plane. And I still, while I don't have to have this section plane, I think it's useful to have it because it gives us a base for what we're doing here. Okay? So I have everything except for that big plane, and I'll go ahead and hit enter. And it's going to say press enter to accept options, but this is where I can change some of the options. Okay? So as we go across here, my direction, right, is do we want it to be the x-axis or the y-axis, or do we want to pick what the direction is? So right now I have it set up. Right, so we have, let's say I had my object here, something like that, and I'm cutting this section here. Right? I have an x and a y axis. Obviously, I'm running in the x-axis. I can, however, cut a section at some odd angle if I want, in which case I'm going to click where it says direction x-axis, and then there'll be an option for pick. And I can choose my own axis. Okay? Which is, again, where it's really useful to have the big section plane because you just copy what that is. For right now, I'm just sticking with the x-axis. Replace no is fine. Name SEC is fine. Load from file, no. That would be if you wanted to slice up your object in a bunch of places. Attributes by object, that's fine. Then we get to solid mode. I like to set solid mode to be surfaces, which means that anything that it cuts through, it should put a surface in. It's not always accurate, but it's worth a shot. So I set my solid mode to surfaces. Right? My labels show all, that's fine. Arrow scale of 1 is fine. Okay? So I'm going to press enter to accept the options. And we're then going to see, right, a white line that represents that section. Do you guys see that white line? Okay. Now, this is going the opposite direction of the way I want my section to be. So right now, I'm going to click on flip, and it's going to flip my section to be going that direction. Okay. Once I have that, it's going to ask me to place the section. So I'm going to use my big section plane to do this. Right? And I'll just snap right there to the middle. And it's going to set section 0, 0. Notice that I can set more than one section right now. So I could cut through my building in a couple different places if I wanted to. For what we're doing, we're just doing it one place. So I'll go ahead and hit enter to finish. Okay? And it will then process this section and create a layer called SEC00. Okay? That's what it's created in this process. Okay? So now, in an ideal world, I'd like to see what this looks like. Okay? So I'm going to go ahead and go up to my section tools, and I'm going to go to View. All right? And when I type STView or go to Section Tools View, it's going to say Select Sections, and you could type in the name of the section, SEC00, or to me it's always easier just to pick the list. in which case you can pick from your list of what sections they are. I'll go ahead and say OK. Then it's going to say select viewport to enable section 00. I want to see it in render 01, right, which is my current viewport. So I'll go ahead and hit enter, and it will take away half the drawing for me. Okay, so I've done that, and I need to turn off. We'll make this active. We turn off that so we can actually zoom in here a little bit. And we can see that it did cut through my building, right? And let me get a curve here. Zoom selected. There we go. And so we can see what it cut through, and we can get a pretty good sense for what this section looks like. Yeah?
If your model is export from a SketchUp and the model is created by meshes, can it still cut through it?
I think so, but we'll have to check it. Okay? So this is now cut through. It didn't do a particularly good job with the filling in the solids. You see I have one solid that it made there. So in reality, I'm going to have to do a little bit of work afterward to fill in what it's cut through. Looks like it did fill in these stairs, but it didn't fill in the lines there. So I'll have to do a little bit of post-processing work, which is fine. I'm going to do that post-processing work on this section 00 layer, right? And so I'll come in, and we'll create a couple little vertical surfaces here. We'll go from there. Like that. We can create a little wall here. Usually the reason that it doesn't actually create this is because there's some problem with some piece of geometry, and it can't sort out where something belongs. So we'll just take a little bit more time and fill this in. Yeah, there's one of my problem pieces of geometry. I'm missing a section of wall that should be there. But we can nicely fill this in. Almost there, bear with me. All right, so I filled that in so that we can actually see this. And since it's on the section 00, if I go back to my original rendering, I can turn that back on. So everything that I've done thus far is not harmful to my drawing, because I can bring back my old section by going to Section Tools and then Clear All Views. Yeah, where's Clear All Views? Clear from All Views. Right? And so I can specify which one it's going to be, say OK, and I get my drawing back. Okay? So it's not a permanent thing that I've done. Okay? The problem here is if we go to ST View, and I go back, and we say, yes, I want to see this, and I want to see it in render 01. OK, all that looks good. If I go to render this in V-Ray, right, V-Ray doesn't recognize the Section Tools cut. Really, really annoying. And I've had a long dialogue with the McNeil people who write Rhino and who write this plugin and say, why doesn't V-Ray recognize it? And they say, we would really like them to. And we've offered to work with them many, many times to make it work. And for whatever reason, V-Ray's like, no, we don't want to do it. So we have to do a workaround to make it work. That being said, we can still do it. Okay? So what I'm going to do from here on out, right, is a destructive thing to my drawing. And so I want to make sure that I save a copy before I do any of this. Okay? So I'll go ahead and save to where I am. So I'll go to File, Save. Then I'm going to do a file Save As, and I'm going to rename the file as this is a permanent change section. So let's let it finish here for just a second. All right, so I'll go to File, Save As. And I'm going to call this section. And I'm going to drop it into today's folder here. And I'll click Save. Okay, so now that I've saved this, what I do is going to destroy parts of my model, and it's much easier to do it on a copy. So that's what we're going to do. So let me go ahead and show everything again. So I'm going to type st clear view. Let me just do st clear all views. We'll bring everything back, and I'm back to where I have this model. I'm going to turn back on that big section plane. Okay, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to split my whole model with this big plane. So I'm going to select absolutely everything, right, except for the plane, and I'm going to type split, and I'm going to select that big plane as my cutting object, and I'm going to hit enter. And this is going to take a little while, so we're going to have to hang out while it goes through and it tries to split everything in my object. Okay? If you have a mesh, something that came from SketchUp or whatever, you're going to have to split mesh rather than split a normal split, but you can still do it. So there are going to be some failed splits, and we're going to figure out what those failed splits are as we go forward. Okay, so now it's done. Okay? And I want to not only see this in the rendered view, but I really want a view that is like my right side view that will show right along the section line, right, what I've cut through. So there it is. And so what I want to do is select this half of the drawing, which actually, let me switch to my left side view so it matches. So we're looking at it the same direction. And let me go to wireframe. Okay, so I want to select everything that is on this side of my model. Okay, and so as we look at it, we see that I've got almost everything. Right, let me take all of this here. Okay, sounds pretty good. We can actually turn off the grass altogether, wherever the bunch grass is. There, we can turn that off altogether because what we're rendering does not need the grass in it. Okay, so I've selected everything, and as I've gone through here, we see that there's nothing that's going across that section line. Okay, I've selected everything but the objects that are on the section itself. And so what I'm going to do now that I have that set up is I'm going to change and apply a very special material to this object. You guys have probably worked in SketchUp before, and you've used the section tool to cut a section in SketchUp, right? And when you see that, you notice that the light goes in as if it was a big hole in the side of the building. Right? You ever notice that? Maybe? Okay. In Rhino and V-Ray, we don't want to have that happen. We want the lighting conditions to match as if the rest of the building were there. Right? It defeats the purpose of cutting a section if you let all the light in. You want to see how the light is inside the building. So we're going to use a special material that is not something that could actually occur in real life, but V-Ray recognizes it. It is completely opaque to light, right? But it's invisible to us to see it. Right? So it's kind of a special thing. I've named it a see-through material. It's available on the course website. If we went there, it's under specialty materials. If you downloaded the resource package under the downloadable resource packages, it's already on your materials, so you can go ahead and load it. But if we go to V-Ray materials, let me go. It will be loaded under Specialty Materials, See-Through. It's this one. And it would be helpful if we could bring it up. So you can see by the little preview, right, it still casts shadow, but we can't see it. Okay, that's essentially what it is. So I'm going to go ahead and go to my materials, and I'm going to load that see-through material. So I'll right-click and say Load Material. And then I'm going to go to my V-Ray materials on my flash drive, Special Materials, See-Through, and I'll go ahead and load it. Perfect. There it is. Okay, and we see it, the preview of it there. It's invisible. Now, ultimately, I'm going to assign it to the materials. But what I don't want to assign it to is any glass, right? Because anything that I have as glass, obviously, I want the light to still come through as if it were a window. So what I'm going to do is come over here and look for wherever I have glass in my layers. So let me go ahead and expand all of these. And we'll look through my layers. And I have glass make this a little bit bigger. Right, there's window glass. I'm just going to turn that off, which will remove it from the section. Right, window, glass railing, we'll turn that off as well. All right, and that should be it. Once I have that glass turned off, right, I'm going to go to my materials. I'm going to right-click on See-Through and say Apply Material to Selection. And then the see-through has been applied to all of that side of my building. Okay? So if I were to switch into my render view here, right, and I were to go into rendered mode, right, we'd see that all of this side of the building has exactly the same material applied to it. It's kind of transparent-ish by Rhino for right now. Okay? So I'm going to go back. And if I were to render this as it is right now, right, the glass would still show up as reflective. So I'm not quite there, right? I have floating panes of glass in my render. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to select, or let me turn back on those two layers, the glass railing, right? And actually, I'm going to right-click on it and say Select Objects, which is going to select all of those. I'm going to turn on the window glass. I'll right-click and say Select Objects, which will select all of the window glass. Then I'm going to deselect, using the Control key, anything that's on this side of the section. Right, so it's not going to be these pieces right there. Okay, but I'm going to leave everything that's over here in the section. Okay, and then I will go to my materials, and I'm going to load just a basic transparent material. So let me create a material, standard, and we'll call this transparent. So, okay, and all I'm going to do right now, we would see, come on, V-Ray. It would be just a gray ball, we hope. There it is as a gray ball. I'm going to change the transparency to white. Click on Preview, and it's perfectly transparent. Okay, so this is different from see-through. See-through blocks light, but it's transparent, visibly transparent. This is lets light go through and is completely transparent to visually. So I'll right-click and say Apply Material to Selection. Perfect. So those are done. I think I might have one set of problems with this block that's here, these blocks, because I don't think my glass applied correctly. So I'm going to select those. We'll select him here as well. And let me go ahead and explode them. Well, we'll do a test render and see. So let me come back to my rendered view here. Okay. And now we're starting to see the light come through. I'm going to turn off that section layer. And I'm going to switch into shaded mode so that we see this more like that. And the last thing I'm going to do is make sure that my section 00 actually has a material applied to it. So let me go to Material. And usually you make that section like a black or a gray or whatever you're cutting through. So let me go ahead and go to Create Material, Standard. And for lack of something better, I'm just going to make it black. And let me rename it to black. I'll say OK. And then I'm going to apply this to my section 00 layer. All right. OK, so I've done all that work, and I'm now set back up. If I go back to my Set View, Render 1 view, right, when I do this render, instead of seeing the front of this building, I'm actually going to see it as a section. Okay? So this is a sectional perspective view. I can change this to be an actual parallel projection if I didn't want to render that by going to my front view or my back. I forget which one it is. It'd be the front view. Set view front there, and do the render in this view. See how it's orthogonal? It would be a standard traditional section. So for the sake of kind of exploring this and showing you this, I would go ahead and do this as the render. So we'll go ahead and click on Render, and we'll let it run. So this is probably going to take a little bit of time. So I'll pause the recording. I'll let you guys start working, and then I'll come back and show you the end result.